we are everything for everyone, and it becomes more of a generic product or generic messaging as we go to market. And then no one can figure out how to actually use the product. There is a general messaging overall, like to talk about what the product is, but you have to build role specific and use case specific messaging and go to market functions in order to target your primary segment that's most likely to succeed first.
Welcome to Generation Builders podcast, brought to you by Software. I'm your host, Mariam. The goal of the show is to unpack and share the superpowers and lessons of today's most successful software companies and discuss how the next generation will use and build software without code. I interview world-class product, growth, and community experts who help build some of the best companies of today, like Canva, Figma, Miro, Notion, and others. Hey everyone, excited to have you join us, Holly, and talk about all things product-led growth and no-code. Holly is the founder and CMO of ExponentialX, a growth and marketing advisory collective. She's one of the top experts when it comes to product-led growth and has led marketing at the early days of Google and Slack, advised companies like Miro, Loom, ServiceNow. Thank you for joining us, Holly.
Thank you for having me. Super excited for the conversation.
So to kick things off, do you mind sharing a bit about your background and where you are now in terms of your career?
I actually started as a generalist, being a strategy consultant at Deloitte Consulting, went into a really small startup a few years later and running their product and marketing org just by need, actually, because no one else was doing it. And I made every mistake I could make, and then went to Google and then Slack. Primarily worked initially product marketing and then fell into growth and growth marketing because again, that's what the business needed. And since then, I really enjoy the combination of creativity and data in marketing. So I try to play in both sides. Been doing advisory for the last few years and worked with a variety of companies, and I really enjoy the breadth. And you get to see some similarities and pattern matching among the type of companies, especially in SaaS, hyper growth type of companies, PLG companies. So I'm learning a lot every single day.
Well, thank you for the intro. Yes, and we're going to talk exactly about that and uncover all of your experience, especially around all the product growth-led topics and tying that a bit into the no-code space that we are in and where I think a lot of people are excited about. So first of all, to start with, maybe you could tell us what exactly is product-led growth from your perspective, and how do you apply it at every stage of growth?
Everyone has a different definition, and it can be broad or narrow. My definition is really product itself being the primary driver of growth is what I call a product-led growth. A lot of times, product-led growth companies has self-serve adoption by end users. Just by nature, user experience, word of mouth is really important, but not necessarily so. As long as, in my mind, user experience being the center point of how it grows, I consider that product-led growth.
Nice. Yeah. And why do you think, if you think so, product-led growth in general is one of the most successful ways to acquire customer, if you think so? And if also being a product-led growth company, what is your recommendation in terms of split between for acquisition in the early days of the company between word of mouth, organic and paid, because you also spent quite some time on paid marketing and started your career there. So really interested to understand how you think of overall, while being product-led, where do you really need to spend your effort to acquire customers?
I believe because product-led growth companies has the product itself being the central differentiator and user experience being the central point, there's a lot of customer love and end user being the primary driver of decision making and adoption. So if there's ample customer love, there's word of mouth. There's viral components where the end users will tell each other, invite each other, and getting their peers to adopt the product. So by nature, you don't have to invest as much money to invite the decision makers to dinners and go to expensive conferences and hosting, like concerts in order to woo the decision maker. The end users will tell each other. So your customer acquisition cost is a lot lower. From a paid marketing perspective, you're targeting end user. So end user has a large volume and also lower cost, versus if you're targeting a decision maker, especially if we're talking about some C-suite decision makers on LinkedIn or in some other platforms, it's really expensive. That's why cost is lower. And also because end user is the primary driver, there's higher retention. There's customer love. Retention is a result of that. And because there's word of mouth, there's more expansion. So that's a really nice flywheel if you start with the end user.
So that's also the challenge, right? Because it's end users. There's no really good way to target them. So how do you really attract those users, and how do you even make it possible for them to know that there is this type of product? Because these are end users. They are not necessarily, because it can be anyone, right? It's not a specific role in a company. It might not be specific department that you're targeting. So how do you then attract them? How do you acquire them?
Actually, initially, there's a lot of founder-led sales. For example, in early days, Slack founders message their friends in various tech companies and ask them to use the beta version of the product. And because the product was really good, and engineers started to adopt it and tell each other. So in early days, I do think the founding team plays a big role in getting the initial set of users. And those users ideally are pioneers, advocates. They love to adopt new products or try new products. They don't mind the product being a little early, sometimes buggy. They would give you feedback. And as founders, really listen to the feedback and change the product accordingly. So another example of listening to customer feedback is in the early days, there was feedback around there's so many channels in Slack. You can't tell which channel is more important. And we made a really small change of adding descriptions in the channel name. And adding how many people are in this channel. Very small change. Even you can say this is a user experience, a design change, but that made a big difference of helping the users to understand which channels are more important and which channels they should join. Examples like these in early days, it really impacts how users adopt the product. So you want to get the initial set of early adopters to give out word of mouth and continue to listen to customer feedback. And then the next one is find users where they are. Depending on the type of product you are building, certain users, you can find them on, for example, if a developer-focused product, Stack Overflows of the world, or Reddit of the world, or Hacker News of the world. If you are building a, let's say, product for financial analysts, they're not there, right? Then you need to find them at CFI Institute, where like CFOs get trained, or you need to find them at accounting groups and communities. So really think about where your users hang out and actually proactively go there and then understand how they talk to each other.
Which totally makes sense. It still comes back to listening to customers and listening to their needs and really going where they are, right? Where you can find them, where they hang out. If we really look at product-led growth companies, are there some KPIs and specific skill sets that you would hire for? So is there anything that's really specific and unique to only these types of companies?
I consider growth as three big buckets: acquisition, retention, and monetization. So for acquisition, it's typically new users, or if you're building a team product, new teams. And for retention, typically activation metrics, 7-day activation, 28-day activation, and then engagement and retention metrics, things like 6 months retention and 90-day retention, etc. And time of usage. So if you're building something that you expect people to use for a long time, etc., to measure the intensity of usage. And then for monetization, it's about upgrade rate and expansion rate. Ultimately, to tie everything together, I look at net dollar retention, look at how many new revenue you get in and how many expansion revenue you bring in.
And from a team perspective, are there any skill sets or any maybe new roles that are also not existent in other companies that are very typical, maybe sales-led or not even product-driven companies, where you would specifically hire because that's the skill set you need to build the right product, acquire the right customers, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the growth function doesn't always exist in sales-led companies. Product development in a lot of enterprise software companies is more a waterfall. You have your yearly plan and then a quarterly plan, and you just build. And for product-led growth companies, because you have to listen to customer feedback all the time, you're in a faster iteration. I'd say the growth function is critical to, one, listen to the customers, gather the information, which means user researcher is important, customer marketing is important, and then growth PMs that really run very fast-paced growth experiments to understand user behavior. And community. Typically, if your developer relations function, it's the community manager who manage the community. Very much like user-focused roles are unique to product-led growth companies.
Which brings me to a question which you mentioned very interestingly, community, which is something that's evolving in these days, I think. And there's lots of also talks about community-led growth, etc. Maybe you could share your perspective of how do you think community and education generally fit within growth and within these types of companies? And should you even invest, and how much should you invest in community early on?
Community is actually very central to product-led growth companies. By nature, product-led growth companies, the end user have to take a more active role in learning the product. So they're the self-starters. And not every product is as easy as, Slack, and you can just send some messages and you understand what it is intuitively. Right. Yeah. A lot of products actually does require the users to explore, to learn, to be educated. And sometimes that is a lonely process. So support, education is very important. The feeling of empowerment is what led the users to continue. Right? So if I poke around and I was like, oh, I don't get this, and I will give up. Versus my boss tells me, oh, you have to use this tool, and I will continue to do. So community is really important because I know there are a group of people out there like me who's also poking around, who's also learning, and I can ask questions and I can see where they are. And it's that sense of, okay, I am not alone and other people are also using this is really important emotionally for the end user. And of course, educational resources and that support from the company is also critical in supporting that feeling to going forward.
Yeah, and I love that you say that, because absolutely agree, because that's something we see with software as well. The community and support is number one thing that always comes up for people to also specifically choose software compared to also many other companies, I'm assuming, because they do get the support and they do feel like they are in it. And there is always someone, whether it's someone from community or from the team, that you can rely on and get help from, especially for types of products where it's requiring learning curve and takes some time to build what you want to build. That's definitely something we have seen very much valued by our customers. So now getting back to, we touched a bit upon customer kind of build types of products. Would love to understand what's unique about the new generation of fast growing companies like Notion, Airtable, Zapier, which are a bit different compared to more standard product-led growth companies like Slack, Dropbox, etc., where there is actually the motion is more product customer build. So actually, it's not just getting the final ready product and starting to use it right away, but you as a user have to build your product and then you get the value. So what do you think is really unique to these types of companies that others don't have?
I think for build yourself type of, the user are typically builders themselves. Build and launch is not the ultimate goal. Adoption is the ultimate goal. In order to build a company for builders, the company itself needs to think about the whole journey of the customer. Meaning the product will enable these builders to do what they want, but also think about what happens after they build. I think helping the builders with distribution, with showcasing what they build, with what comes after.
Because these products typically also tend to be very horizontal, right? Because it's built by yourself, then there is all different portions or different types of ways you can build stuff. And the product itself is horizontal, which also means it gets attracted by lots of different types of users. Then also I'm interested to hear your thoughts around the GTM specifically, and how do you even market that type of product to these different types of users? And also as a result of that, how do you even decide which customer segment to focus on? What's relevant for the business and what's good for you as a business long term?
One trap for like horizontal products is we are everything for everyone, and we don't want to give up anyone.
Exactly.
And then it becomes more of a generic product or generic messaging as we go to market, and then no one can figure out how to actually use the product.
If you're everything to everyone, then you are nothing to everyone, right?
Right. Exactly. My view on this is actually there's different layers of messaging to the market. There is a general messaging overall, like to talk about what the product is, but you have to build role specific and use case specific messaging and go to market functions in order to target your primary segment that's most likely to succeed first. And then after you win the primary segment, and then expand to other segments that's adjacent. So there needs to be a roadmap step by step. First winning, for example, for Slack, it's the engineers, and then you expand to adjacent departments. It's the product managers, and then it's the marketers, and then it's the agencies, and then it's wall to wall to the entire company. As a horizontal product, you would want to pick the bullseye who's more viral, who drives more activation and engagement, which start to propel the flywheel before you go after everyone. There is also this difference between what you talk about on your website and what you talk about in sales calls. Of course, a lot of PLG companies don't even have a sales team, but eventually at some point you need to think about going up market. So what we talk about on the homepage, on the website, there could be 30 different use cases, very comprehensive.
Right.
You build that out, just in case someone from a particular use case will come and try, but then your sales efforts, you want to focus on the most valuable ICPs to go after.
Yeah, so now talking about sales, also would love to understand. I think this is something that typically product-led growth companies might not think early on, right? That you need to have sales at some point in time, maybe down the line. If you have, let's say, product-led motion already as a company, how do you move towards product-led sales and without really becoming a very sales-driven company and being too far away from the real customer?
Going up market is probably the decisive moment in the POG company's life cycle that determines whether you are a $100 million company or $100 billion company. And it's a very difficult process, and a lot of companies are trying to do it, and I don't think necessarily we all figured out a winning formula. One key element in here is POG companies in early days, you almost majority of them would target either SMBs or individual users at larger companies. And in certain companies, between the users and the buyers, there's a strong connection, and the users are willing to be the advocates and to advocate on behalf of the product to the buyers. Buyers typically, your directors and VPs and head of IT. In certain cases, they're not always willing to. So you almost have to really pay attention to cultivate these pioneers. From a data and process perspective, the most natural next step is to understand the most active and valuable users based on firmographic and usage data, and identify your PQLs, typically product qualified leads. Identify those accounts that has the potential to have sales to outreach. So based on your existing user activities, identify the sales targets, versus the sales team would go out on their own cold if the user doesn't even have an existing account and understand the product. And that is much harder to have the cold outreach. Really understand the existing users and identify the high value customers is one. And then also understand the cost to serve. One key challenge for product-led growth companies is you almost have to serve a large portion of the market in order to gather enough data to understand who's most valuable. You have to pay a lot of Amazon a cost in order to serve these customers, and not every customer is valuable. Constantly adjust what's the personal use case versus the business use case, and focus on the business use case and users.
That's an interesting approach regarding the usage, which and also the costs, which definitely we have seen as well. Well, not that in that big portion, but we do have already 70,000 users, which is huge, right? If you think, but because of the nature of the product, which is free, obviously a lot of those are just going to be free users, maybe even active free users, right? Using your product, happily sharing with their community, but they're never going to convert. But also at the same time, you have to really be very structured and disciplined in understanding and all of these customers, really being able to segment them, which is one of the biggest challenge. How do you segment all these different types of customers and really understanding who is actually the most valuable for you as a company?
It's a huge challenge. A lot of users, especially, how companies identify these valuable users is based on their domain, right? Like their email domain. But for a lot of builder type of products, you would use your personal email address to sign up.
That's exactly right. And exactly what we are seeing. Lots of people are building real applications and they never have their domain, right? And then you try to figure out, are those actual users? But the applications are real applications. They run in live and they bring value to themselves. And then, that's much harder problem that you have to overcome and have to find ways to really figure things out, which is also making it interesting.
Yeah, there are data sources that you can use to match personal email address and business email address. And there, of course, can use cookies to match some of these behaviors. But but the match rate is not always high, right? You can expect 20 to 30% of match rate in a lot of these tools. So it will constantly be a challenge. I think progressive profiling is a way I see could work. For example, like after the user have adopted the product for a while, asking them for more information to provide more value, and then users are more likely to tell us more.
Exactly. Yeah. We have been also trying to implement that internally in the product. So now we are ourselves are in the no-code space, and no-code has become kind of the word that everyone now keeps talking about, especially in the last 2 years, because there is lots of interesting products being built, and also companies realizing the value with no-code products and no-code tools in general, and what it can do for their companies. What do you think in general? How is work and the tools changing in modern organizations? What's the next phase of this tool set and products that will empower individual knowledge workers to adapt to the tools to their workflows and really build their own solutions versus buying off the shelf big, very static and rigid solutions that most of the time do not work for the specific problem they have?
I don't claim to be an expert in no code. What I observe is there's a big trend in enabling the non-technical folks to build. If before a lot of these products are built for developers and more technical users, there are more tools out there that enable the marketers, the RevOps folks, and the product folks to really build something quick so that they can test the market. That's one. Another one is I noticed there's a trend of all-in-one tools because there's a proliferation of SaaS tools. A lot of tools go very deep into solving one problem. And then companies start to pay for, I don't know, like 10 different tools in one department. So in the last few years, I noticed a few attempts where one tool that you can buy and pay for, and it solves all your problems. And whether that actually is true is still to be seen. But there's a lot more of those consolidation and conversion.
By saying no code, I was actually exactly referring to that mostly is really enabling non-tech people and business people to build things themselves, right? Because they are the ones closer to the problem. They know what their specific problem is in their work, and they are the best person to solve that problem. And if we look a bit beyond like today, how will the new generation of kids, you think, learn software, and how will they build their own? Because right now I think we're really in the infancy of no code and this build generation. And what do you think will happen in the next 10 years?
I'm super jealous of the kids today. They just have so much resources. And I still remember like learning basic, in school. And we have to like only 1 hour per week. You can enter the computer lab. And it's a very precious moment versus kids today. They have all these access to, even TikTok videos that they can watch, YouTube videos they can watch, and like access to all these tools. So yeah, I feel like I can't even imagine what these kids can build, 10 years from now. I'm bracing myself for a really, really interesting future.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be interesting, especially now having all of the current and older generation being able to use these tools and doing so many interesting things. I'm also keen and really excited to see what's happening in the next years. Thank you so much, Holly. It was great to chat, and thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and these skills and everything around the space, what you think and how you structure your kind of approach to building and growing companies. Where can people find you?
They can find me on exponentialx.com or hollychen.co.
And also, I learned recently that you have your own podcast. So maybe 2 words about that as well. And if people want to follow you and follow the journey, also you interviewing other people and learning from everyone.
Thank you. Word of mouth works. The podcast is called Growing Unicorns. So we talk about how hypergrowth SaaS companies will grow. So yep, have a listen.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Definitely follow and listen. And thank you so much, Holly, for joining.